side of the screen. So
yeah, they're coming in. Welcome everybody. It is time to get started. So I am John Anderson, Director of Media for Nebraska Firearms Owners Association, and we're just going to get together tonight, have another one of these online town hall meetings. We'll do it live, so you can get those comments and questions in, and we'll get as many of those fielded as we can. Hold on here, I got feedback, and I think I'd be professional here. There we go. There we go. Okay, so we'll field as many questions as we can with the amount of time that we have here.
Of it.
Right.
So
We can be in the middle of it.
all right, and there we go. All right, so real quick here, we've got a few board members with us, along with our friend volunteer here at NFOA who does a lot of legal work, and I'll introduce him in just a second, and then we'll let him kind of take off explaining the bill. But first off, joining us tonight from the board of directors for NFOA, we've got our secretary with us, Nate Griffith. How are you, Nate?
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
Doing super. Glad to finally be here. Finally be able to talk about this. I think I can speak for all of us that have been working on this. Just the amount of pride that we have being a part of the process to get this done. So also we've got our vice president, Joe Goebel, is with us. How are you, sir?
Not too bad. Glad to be here tonight.
And then also our director of community outreach, Aaron Wallen, is with us as well. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
All right.
All right, cool. And then last but certainly not least, we have got the legal counsel for, tell me if I've got this right, Dick, you're legal counsel for the government committee, but you also work with Senator Brewer in his office, and you helped draft this bill, did you not?
yeah, so Senator Brewer is chairman of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. So that committee office is his office. And yes, I am the architect and principal author of LB77.
Awesome. So this is Dick Clark from Dick Clark Law, who also, again, works in the Capitol building as well. And yes, helped draft this bill. So, all right. I've got somebody out there asking on Facebook if we're live. If anybody is watching on Facebook, maybe make a comment, ask that person to refresh their screen, because we should be able to be seen in all these places. So real quick, Dick, we're just going to let you take off here. And if you would just go back through and explain exactly what LB77 does, what it doesn't do. And I did, before we went live here, I did ask Dick to maybe make this in not lawyer speak. So if a guy like me can understand it, then anybody can understand it. So he's got a tough road ahead of him. So Dick, we'll just let you take off here and talk about LB77 again.
So, of course, one major effect that we'll see from LB77 before I launch into this is that the color of Nebraska on the little constitutional carry map will change. Now, that's pretty big, important effect, but actually we care about why it changes and what it means that it's changing. So, of course, LB77 has been promoted and described and discussed as a constitutional carry bill. Some people might refer to that as permitless carry, which is a more literal, less sales pitchy version of what we're talking about. And the other major part of the bill has to do with state preemption of local law. And so we'll go through what that means for carry, what that means in terms of the preemption part, and just kind of what the bill does and what it doesn't do. Okay, so first off, the most important thing that it does is it makes it so that if you are an adult who's 21 and up and you are not prohibited from possessing firearms or ammunition under federal law, under that standard that exists in 18 USC 922. So the list of things that you always say no to when you're buying a gun in the gun store, that's the list. If you don't have to say yes to any of those questions on the form at the gun store, What LB77 is going to mean to you is that the crime of carrying a concealed weapon doesn't exist anymore. Okay. And not just for handguns, but for all concealable weapons. So that includes the knife with the blade that's over 3.5 inches, which for as long as any of us has been alive has constituted a concealed weapon if no part of it was visible. We fixed that now. That includes the fillet knife in your tackle box, the camp knife in your backpack when you're out hiking, and it includes a pocket knife or any other knife with a blade over 3.5 inches. Now you can carry that. Brass knuckles are legal in Nebraska for the first time since 1873, 150 years to get those back. But of course, mostly what we've talked about in relation to this bill has to do with firearms and specifically with handguns, because that's what most of us go around carrying on a daily basis. That's what I carry every day anyway. So what this bill means for permit holders, actually not that much other than the knife thing. As far as handguns go, if you were already a permit holder, really not a lot is going to change for you, because essentially all of the rules that you're familiar with in terms of where you can carry, when you can carry, how you can carry, that's all carried over from the Permit Act. All that stuff stays flat for the most part. And so if you know how the rules work for a permit holder, that's just how they work for all law-abiding adults now. Okay. So that is the major impact for carrying concealed handguns, is that all of the things that permit holders, used to have a permit to do, now just anybody who's an adult who can possess a firearm or ammunition lawfully can do those things. So we've got the benefit of constitutional carry, not just as to handguns, but also knives and other weapons that we might see fit to conceal about our person. And really the principle here is just that it's not the object that's evil, right? It is the intent of the bearer of the object, the user of the object. And so Nebraska law just isn't going to treat you like carrying a concealed weapon is a blameworthy act anymore, because it isn't. The only thing that's blameworthy about carrying concealed is if you're carrying concealed because you're up to something, right? Something that violates the rights of others. But if you're not, why should we care if you're carrying? So Nebraska law going to be much better in that regard of just not treating it like a blameworthy act when we go armed, if we are adults and if we are law abiding. Now, the other big part of this bill is state preemption. And preemption is one of those words that like only lawyers use. And so, you're going to get charged a lot when some lawyer is using that in a sentence while you're paying him by the hour, right? But preemption basically just means that the higher authority in Nebraska, the state government, which created all of the political subdivisions and empowered them, lists their powers. In some cases, we have home rule cities that are chartered differently, Lincoln and Omaha. But ultimately, all those powers flow from acts of the legislature. And what the legislature giveth, the legislature can take away. And so what this bill does is it totally takes away from local governments, so cities, counties, all political subdivisions, the power to regulate or prohibit the carrying, the transfer, the transportation, the storage of firearms and other weapons. Okay. So the practical effect of that is all of these local gun control or knife control ordinances that have been layered on beyond what state law does are going to go away when this bill goes into effect. Now, we don't know the exact date that the bill will go into effect because it is 90 days from the adjournment of the legislature sine die, meaning without day. So that's what we call it when the legislature terminates their regular session for the year and is done work with that regular session. Now, work maybe a strong word for what we've been doing up there since we haven't been passing many bills. But in any case, so about September 9th, September 10th, probably, this will go into effect and the Omaha Handgun Registry goes away. The Lincoln, transaction reporting requirement for firearms other than rifles and shotguns commonly used for sporting purposes, that goes away, which will be a workload off of the dealers' backs because they're having to do most of the compliance on that. Lincoln's switchblade law goes away. Omaha's firearms transportation rules go away. Omaha's open carry ban and regime relating to having to get a permit to open carry, all of that gets wiped out by this bill. So it's a tremendous step forward in terms of respecting the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And I'm pretty proud to be a part of it.
Excellent. All right. Let's get this back here to where we're in the Brady Bunch mode again. All right. So I know some of the questions that have been coming through have already been answered just by what you told us. But again, we just want to make sure that everything's clear as a bell for everybody that is tuning in and the ones that will watch this after the fact. So I am going to go back through some of these questions, and even though you have answered them, we're gonna tackle them again just to make sure everybody knows for sure what's going on. Because again, we are not only an organization that works in the legislature or with the legislature, but we are also all about training and education, right? So we want to make sure that everybody is as educated as possible, because if you do not know the law and you happen to be prosecuted, that will not be a valid defense. Just saying, well, I didn't know. So it behooves everybody to learn, which is why I'm glad you're all here tuning in and finding out the right answers here. So over on the YouTube side, Yukon Cornelius, I'm not so sure that's his real picture, but he wants to know, will LB77 prevent the prosecution of open carry absent any other crime in Omaha and Lincoln?
Yeah, so Lincoln has never had a ban on open carry, at least not since I've lived here. But Omaha has, and Omaha has had this permit requirement. Now, we've already had partial preemption of that requirement under the Permit Act. And so if you had a permit, then you could already carry in Omaha, openly or concealed. You might get some funny looks if you do it openly, but it's not illegal. And what LB77's preemption language is going to do is essentially just wipe that local ordinance off of the books. Now, they'll actually have to take action at the local level to literally remove it from what you see online in the ordinances that they have posted on their website. But on the day that LB77 becomes effective, those local ordinances will just be void. They will not be laws anymore, as it were. They won't be ordinances. And because they don't have the force of law, they cannot be the basis for a prosecution. If somebody tried to file a claim, a criminal claim against someone on the basis of that now voided Omaha ordinance, for example, on open carry, what would happen is, before you ever even enter a not guilty plea, in fact, you would never enter any plea of any kind, because what would happen is your lawyer would file a motion before that happens and basically say, hey, judge, they've accused my client of a crime that isn't a crime. Like, this isn't one that's in the book, that counts anyway. And so it just wouldn't even get beyond that. I don't think you'd even have to appear in court in all likelihood. So the answer is, it should prevent that prosecution. And if it didn't, the prosecution would be very short and have a terminal case of not a crime. So.
All right. Awesome. DB wants to know, if a business says no firearms, can I still carry it into the store?
No. And there's two reasons why the answer is no. One is, if you are concealed carrying a handgun, and then you go ahead and carry into that location, either that is conspicuously posted with signage at every public entrance, or if you come into possession of actual knowledge, you learn that that is the policy of the person in control of that place or premises, you're going to get a firearms charge. Okay. And it just looks bad to get charged with crimes related to guns. So don't do it. I recommend. Now, the other thing is, if it's any other kind of weapon, in theory, they could forbid all kinds of weapons in the store, but it wouldn't be a gun crime for other things. It would be just some kind of a criminal trespass issue, just like any time somebody who owns a piece of property tells you to leave and you say, I'm not gonna, in theory, the police could get involved and you could be cited for criminal trespass for, entering the property of another, refusing to leave the property of another in those circumstances. So, and the principle here is, hey, we like property rights, right? The whole reason we believe in the right to keep and bear arms is because it serves to help us defend our other rights, right? The right to life is the one we most commonly think of, but the right to life, liberty, and property are all important. And I would hope that my fellow gun owners and concealed carriers would want to respect those rights of others. And, if they're unrealistic about whether people ought to carry or not, maybe just deny them your business, and they'll learn that lesson the old fashioned way, through a hit to the bottom line. But let's respect their rights in the meantime.
Indeed. All right. Chad wants to know over on the YouTube side, is reciprocity affected by this? And if so, how?
It won't be affected at all, but it's a good thing to raise because there's two reasons why I do still recommend, if you can afford to do it, that you keep concealed handgun permit valid. The first reason is reciprocity. Now, it's a diminishing number of states, right? A shrinking number of states that even require a permit, right? We're now 27th on the list of constitutional carry states, or will be once we, have a law that's become effective in September. But there are still some states that recognize the Nebraska concealed handgun permit, but are not constitutional carry states themselves. And so, for that, I think it's 8 or 9 states that are in that gap between constitutional carry and the really, really bad states that we just would like to avoid if we can. There is still some benefit there. And then the other reason to keep a permit, besides continuing to enjoy those reciprocity relationships, is just as a purchase permit. And it's a purchase permit that is more durable. It doesn't tear up in your wallet, and it has your picture on it. And I think that especially when you do private transfers, and I'll tell you, a lot of FFLs are going to be a lot more settled if you're using that, because frankly, the issuance practices of the purchase permit programs in the different counties vary widely in quality. And I know of at least one county that has been issuing permits to 18-year-olds, even though they cannot be issued to anybody other than 21 and up, according to state law. So there's a lot of reasons why I think people will have a bigger smile on their face when you're buying a gun from them if you present that concealed handgun permit. Okay.
Very good. All right. Chad also wants to know, you kind of covered this already, but again, I just wanted to put it up on the screen here. Assume the old permits will expire and not be renewed. Well, I need to purchase one of those $5 purchase permits like before the CHP system was put into place.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is yes. Now, I don't necessarily agree with your assumptions. I mean, if people let their permits expire, then they expire. But the permit program essentially remains unchanged. It's just optional for your use for purpose of carrying a concealed weapon in the state of Nebraska, or concealed handgun in the state of Nebraska. But you can absolutely continue to renew for that $50 renewal fee. Now, that's a little more expensive per year that you have the permit, right? It's $10 a year instead of $5 for 3 years, like you get with that purchase permit. But yeah, the answer is, if you're not going to have a valid concealed handgun permit and you still want to be able to buy handguns or receive handguns from other people who are not in your immediate family, you're still going to need a purchase permit. So I recommend that you always have one of those or the other. And again, the concealed handgun permit is just a little more durable physically, and it takes longer to expire. The maximum length of time that a Brady ID can last, which is 5 years. So,
all right, Jeff on the YouTube side wants to know exemptions for law enforcement or retired law enforcement.
So I'll be honest, that's kind of beyond the scope here. LB77 just doesn't address these things at all. Doesn't limit people who are carrying using LEOSA credentials, which is the federal act that pertains to people who have current, and then people who have separated from law enforcement under good terms after a certain minimum number of years of service. And LEOSA certification, you got to keep it up. You've got to go and retest in order to keep that current. And I would commend to you a great trainer named Craig Schneider, who has spent a career training law enforcement on firearms, and he would be your on-ramp to more information about how to keep that LEOSA credential current. So,
all right. And Dale wants to know, do you still have to tell a peace officer that you're carrying with or without a concealed carry permit?
Yeah, this is one of the requirements that was under the Concealed Handgun Permit Act, and it remains under LB77. And I will tell you, we did get a lot of pushback from various gun groups, pro-gun groups, who said, hey, most states don't have this duty to inform. Or if they do, it's only on request. You just have to be truthful. If a cop asks you, hey, are you lawfully carrying a gun? You got to tell them yes. So NRA pushed pretty hard for us to try to eliminate duty to inform. And then the other groups like, Gun Owners of America and so on, they don't like duty to inform either. The reason we kept it in there is not because we're in love with it. It's just because politics is the art of the possible, right? And so if we started monkeying around with all these different parameters from the Concealed Handgun Permit Act, we can't then use the rhetorical strategy that, hey, we've taken the 17 years of data from having the Concealed Handgun Permit Act, and now we're applying those lessons to the general population. Because then there'd be an in for somebody to say, well, hey, actually here you're monkeying around with how it's been going. And so I'm not saying that that should be the law forever in Nebraska, but I'm just saying we would never have come to an accord with the Police Officers Association without that remaining in the law. And as you may be aware, it even got a little more serious, not for the first two offenses. They remain the same as what the existing law had. However, a third offense, which it's actually impossible to get to under existing law because your permit is revoked before you can get to a third offense. But if you do have a third offense now, so you've had two previous, cases, two previous lectures from the judge where you were convicted, and now you again fail to immediately inform an officer or other emergency responder upon official contact, that is going to be a class 4 felony. So I just recommend that the very first words out of your mouth when that officer is walking up to the car window is, hey, officer, before we get started, just so you know, I am carrying concealed today. I wouldn't say like lead with the word gun, lead with that respectful. Hey,
I have a gun.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But you do have the duty to inform. It is something you must immediately do, and it's upon any official contact. And remember, it's not just police, it's any emergency responder. So you could be at the scene of an accident and, a paramedic's coming up saying, hey, did you see if this person was hit in the head or something? At that point, you need to tell that person because they're in that category where there's a duty to inform as well. So.
All right. DB also wants to know if I'm walking my dog at night, can I carry openly now, which is going to depend on where you live, DB. So let's assume that that's Omaha.
Yeah. So if you live in Omaha, remember, there is still a local ordinance against open carry until LB77 becomes effective. So nothing has changed right now. Once we get to September, whatever day it is in September that we hit that 90 days from the end of session and this law becomes effective with all the other ones, at that point, yes, you could open carry in Omaha. Now, that's still a prudential question you have to ask yourself. Hey, is open carry a superior choice here versus concealed carry? And I'll leave that advice to your tactical trainers and stuff like that and not give it to you as legal advice because I think it's more of a prudential question. Hey, is this prudent for me to do more than a strictly legal one at that point? So,
all right. We've got a couple questions here from different people that kind of go along with each other here. So I'll flash them both up on the screen. Dan over on Facebook wants to know, Omaha does not allow for carry in city parks. Does that go away? And then Todd on Facebook wants to know, does that mean city and county government can no longer post places such as parks as gun-free zones? So two people are thinking alike there.
Yeah, well, good questions. And I'm going to have to give you a lawyerly answer. I'm sorry, but the answer is it depends. So here, let me tell you what it depends on. We do. So remember, in the Concealed Handgun Permit Act, it already says a person who owns or is in control of a place or premises can set a policy banning the carrying of concealed handguns on that property, on that place or premises. Now, governments own places and premises, among other owners. Some places are owned by governments, right? And so government buildings can still be posted. They're subject to the same rules, right? Conspicuous signage or actual notice. And now some government buildings don't have to be posted, right? If it contains a courtroom, by default, that is a prohibited place under the law, just like it is today. Banks are prohibited places for concealed handgun carry already, right? They don't have to post that. And if you've taken the concealed handgun permit class, you're familiar with the list. Otherwise, stay tuned for the awesome training modules that are going to be available from NFOA and others that are going to cover this. So if that's the one thing you missed, you stepped out and went to the bathroom during your class, you can get your remedial training that way through the module. But yeah, so the park question, let me zoom in on that. A park is a place or premises, and it has an owner, and that owner is, in this case, the government. And because we've given express authority to owners or those in control of places or premises to set a policy, technically, in theory, it's possible for them to do it, but it depends on the park, I think, whether it's practically possible. And I'll give you an example. I live across the street from a 4-city block open air park. You can walk up from any point on the compass and step across the curb and you're in the park, right? So there are no discrete locations that could be posted. So in my opinion, unless you had like a wall of signs around the park, you have not met your burden under the law as the city, and therefore your prohibition does not carry the force of law for purposes of tripping this switch and making it a gun crime. Now, if it is a park where you have very clear places where here's where you go in, here's where you go out, I think it is possible to post those in a more controlled access environment. I think it is still going to be possible for them to prohibit at those locations. Now, they most clearly have the authority to do that in relation to concealed handguns. And it's not as clear that they're going to have the authority to do that when it comes to other types of concealed weapons. So use that information how you will, but there's my explanation of the "it depends" answer. So,
Yeah, I know that was one of the things during the debates that Senator Raybould was very curious about whether or not the city of Lincoln would be able to ban concealed carry on, say, city buses.
well, and buses is another question because it's not as obvious that a bus is a place. Maybe it's a premises, right? And I told a reporter, well, mobile hair salons are premises in the law for purposes of inspection. Food trucks are premises. So it wouldn't be the craziest thing for somebody to argue that a bus is a premises, but it's a little more of a stretch than these other examples like government rented or owned buildings. And frankly, I don't like the policy of not allowing people to concealed carry on buses, because what's the population that's more likely to be served by buses? Probably they're starting and or ending in a neighborhood where they're going to be more likely to be the victim of a crime. More likely they themselves are lower income and they're just the kind of person who maybe can't afford to get the permit or whatever. And, so that's just the kind of person we want to help with LB77. And I don't like the idea of something that's just an extension of the sidewalk. In some sense, a mode of transportation is now a stopper for me being able to defend myself today, maybe at the destination I go to. So I think it's an open question. I don't believe the city of Lincoln or the city of Omaha are confident that they have the authority to ban it on buses. But let's just say I wouldn't get up and give a speech about why I'm concealed carrying on the bus today.
Yeah, very good advice there. Okay, generic dude wants to verify the CHP is up for renewal in July, so he will have to pay for the renewal to stay legal to carry during that gap between July and September, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Unless you just want to shift into open carry and you're outside of Omaha. But again, for reasons already stated, I recommend that you go ahead and spring for the $50 and keep the credential, because I do think it'll come in handy. And how cool will you feel if you get to use your concealed handgun permit as your voter ID? Won't that be fun when you vote next year? So, you'll be the cool kid at the polling place.
There you go.
So,
just don't take your concealed handgun with
that's
you.
that's right. You can have the permit without the firearm. So,
but most polling places in most precincts anyway tend to be a church or a school. Yeah. Anyway, so all right. So a lot of you asking about duty to inform. We did cover that. So if you're tuning in late and you missed it, go back and watch from the beginning. You will get your answers there. But short answer, duty to inform remains no matter who you are, whether you have the permit or not. So yes, and that's something that you would be a great help to all of your friends and colleagues if you would help spread that word for those people who have never carried concealed before and are going to venture out for the first time without going through a concealed handgun permit class. Then for sure, make sure that you help spread the word. And yes, as Dick alluded to, we will have some training modules that will include a list of prohibited places, basically a list of the frequently asked questions, the FAQs. We will compile those and get the word out to direct people to that just as soon as we've got that done. All right. So Ray over on Facebook wants to know if Nebraska State Patrol has given an official statement on the passage of LB77 and if you could speak to what their stance is, if you know it.
Not that I'm aware, and no, I can't.
Okay, so, there you go.
I will tell you though that I have a very good working relationship with legal counsels over at the State Patrol, and in particular the one who kind of rides herd on the permit program. Governor Pillen and before him, Governor Ricketts both supported constitutional carry being adopted in Nebraska. And State Patrol is what we call a code agency, which means that their boss is hired and fired by the governor. So they kind of have to, march to the orders handed to them from higher, unlike some of the independent boards and commissions and things like that. So State Patrol has always been helpful on when we had questions about, hey, would you prefer to be drafted this way or that, or do you think this jams you up? So they've been nothing but supportive, and they're aware, of course, that there is likely to be some fiscal impact on their office in terms of, cash funded programs like the permit program where it's fee for service, and that they're going to have to adjust their personnel and, their staffing accordingly. But I would say that the statement from State Patrol that you need is the statement from the governor, because he's ultimately the boss of State Patrol, and he strongly supports LB77, described it as a promise kept, both from the campaign trail and more importantly from the Constitution, where it promises that this is a legal right we enjoy in Nebraska and in the United States. So there you have it. I think they have to say they're in support, even if there are some dissenters in the ranks. They can't be loud about it. So.
Right. Well, and I'm not going to name any names or name any departments, but I've spoken with law enforcement from State Patrol all the way down to local county and city law enforcement, and I have yet to have a conversation with anybody who is against citizens carrying, is against removing the requirement for the permit. And honestly, even though duty to inform is the law in this state, I have yet to speak to a law enforcement officer that feels like that actually makes a difference in their life. But just remember that it will make a difference in your life if you don't inform. So make sure you comply with the law. Yep. You don't have to agree with it. You just have to abide by it.
Yeah.
And that's the only legal advice I give to anybody is we'll tell you what the truth is. You make your own decisions after that. Just don't say we didn't tell you. That's why we're doing this tonight. Bill over on Facebook side wants to know, how does constitutional carry work with folks out of Nebraska? Can a person from South Dakota come in Nebraska using constitutional carry, and a Nebraska person going to South Dakota using their constitutional carry? So there's kind of a loaded question there.
Well, so the answer is states only pass laws for themselves. And then sometimes states agree on things together. Like that's how driver's license works. They work because there's this interstate compact, and, there are similar interstate compacts, but really permits are usually not based on compacts. They're just more often based on one state looking at the other state's standards and, saying, okay, got to be this tall to ride, and they meet that standard. So you can carry using that permit here. The way it has worked in Nebraska is that the Attorney General and the Attorney General evaluates those standards in other states with State Patrol, and then State Patrol ultimately publishes a list of the ones that are officially recognized by the state of Nebraska. That will become irrelevant, and I guess they'll still have a statutory duty to figure that out, but it won't really matter to anybody because we don't distinguish in the law between people who are inside of Nebraska versus outside of Nebraska. And frankly, the states that have done that, I think, are violating the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution, where you're not supposed to impair people's rights based on their citizenship and among the several states. And so this was written to be a civil right for everybody who's law abiding and an adult. And that includes people who might have a license plate from a different state on their car.
Very good. All right. Wesley wants to know, will there be any training required to get a gun permit now? I've had in the past, but need to renew. Any training needed for new first-time permits? So let's, because I'm not sure if that means the purchase certificate or the actual CHP, but let's answer it from both directions, would you please?
Yeah. So first off, if we're talking about a firearm purchase certificate, or what we commonly call a purchase permit, that is just based on a NICS check, the National Instant Check System that the FBI operates. So it's the same instant background check that is conducted by gun dealers. Now, some sheriffs in particular counties have taken it upon themselves to hit more than that, although technically I don't think that's authorized by state law. But yeah, the bottom line is we haven't changed anything about the process for obtaining a purchase permit, nor have we changed anything about the process for obtaining a concealed handgun permit. It's just that second one, the concealed handgun permit, is now optional for concealed carry. So the purchase permit law is still in effect. And if you do not have a concealed handgun permit, you're going to have to get that $5 purchase permit from your county sheriff so that you can still buy and or otherwise receive handguns.
Okay. Rex wants to know, can we carry concealed in the Capitol now?
No, we didn't change any of the prohibited locations from the Concealed Handgun Permit Act. And there's 2 reasons you can't carry in the Capitol this time of year and 1 reason the rest of the year. So the 1 reason that's true year round is that it is a building that contains a courtroom. And any building that contains a courtroom, in this case, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, so 2 courtrooms, that's a prohibited location just by default under the state law. And that was true. It is true already for permit holders, and it will continue to be true now for people carrying under LB77 who are not permit holders. So same rule applies. Now, the second reason you can't carry in the Capitol concealed this time of year is because you're not allowed to carry concealed at a meeting of a government body like the legislature. And so for that reason, open carry, we haven't changed that at all. Open carry is legal in the Capitol, although you may not achieve your objective that you're hoping to achieve. If you do it, it may not always be strategically sound, but it is legal. And although Senator Michaela Cavanaugh did run a bill to outlaw weapons generally in the Capitol, by the way, which is going to outlaw like 100 objects in the Brewer office. Anyway, really not much legislation is passing, and certainly nothing introduced by Senator Michaela Cavanaugh is going to pass this year. So you are safe for another cycle in terms of being able to open carry in the Capitol.
All right. Let's see. We've got a few questions out there that don't necessarily apply to LB77, so I'm sorry, but we will be letting those go tonight so we can stay on topic here. I know I saw some other stuff here. Let's see. A lot of these questions we can ask, we can sum these up by just saying, as far as prohibited places, nothing has changed, right, Dick? I mean, the prohibited places, as you said before, that are listed under the Concealed Handgun Permit Act remain prohibited for anybody with or without a permit now. Yeah,
and again, if you're already a permit holder, not much in your world is going to change from LB77, at least not immediately, because you essentially already had the rights that we're now more broadly extending to the general law-abiding adult population. So it's like, hey, we're here for the party. Oh, this looks like my living room. You know, it's like some of us have already been at this party. Right now, we just get to welcome others aboard. But you know, it's also important because you know, I've defended people who were charged with carrying a concealed handgun, even though they were permit holders, because they forgot their permit one day, or because it expired and they had not yet renewed. And so those little gaps where the government has had opportunities to play gotcha, even with people who have done the training, who have gotten the background check, we've closed those up now, right? And now we've eliminated the ability for government to play gotcha with your rights in that way, just because your magic rectangle has expired or because it's in your other, you know, pair of pants or something. Now, with that said, you've always had to carry an ID with you while you carry concealed with your permit. And actually that ID requirement does not go away under 77. And that's not something that we've talked a lot about. So still carry your wallet with you, even if there's no longer a concealed handgun permit in it, whenever you're going to concealed carry a handgun. Now that doesn't apply to any of these other things that we're talking about, like the knife that's got the blade over 3.5 inches. There's no ID requirement there. But if you're going armed as a concealed handgun carrier, bring your wallet along.
There's been a couple of comments that they're way back up in the reel now, but that talk about schools. There is a federal prohibition of firearms within 1,000 feet of schools, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Now we do have a provision here in Nebraska for if you need to drive onto school property to pick up your child, or
Yeah.
you know, forbid you have to go in and talk to somebody in there. So would you just cover that real quick so people will know what they need to do to be compliant with school?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because so you're talking about the Federal Gun-Free School Zones Act,
Right.
and it was originally found unconstitutional, and then Congress got smart and passed it with some flowery language invoking the Commerce Clause, and then the court said, "Oh, okay, now it's okay." But it is not a consistently enforced law. There's some question whether the 1,000-foot rule is enforceable against law-abiding gun owners, because it's kind of like you say, well, the Second Amendment's my permit, sir. Well, I mean, I live within 1,000 feet of a school,
So do I.
and I've got to keep my guns at my house. I don't have a hole in the ground out in the woods to keep them in, and so that's not a best practice to keep them some other place. So I think that they'd have a massive problem uniformly, or even in an ad hoc fashion, trying to enforce that, because just, in my opinion, blatantly unconstitutional to say that there are these broad swaths of the community where you can't even see a school, but if you measured it on Google Maps, you'd be within 1,000 feet, right? And now I can't be armed there even. Yeah. So the bottom line is, just don't be a knucklehead. Definitely do not ever go to any school property with a firearm unless you have been told that you're there for the trap team or for the rifle team, and somebody who has school credentials is telling you how you're doing this. Okay. Other than that, the only person who can bring firearms onto a school property in Nebraska is a law enforcement official. I will tell you that one of the things Senator Brewer and some other senators want to work on next year is addressing the problem of, bad people wanting to go hurt kids in school, by giving schools more options about how to staff up on security. If you're a really big school, maybe you can afford to have a bunch of money passing through your hands to go pay for all these school resource officers. But especially on a smaller scale of operation at a school, having some administrators or maybe a couple of teachers with extra taskers where they're prepared to be that fire extinguisher if the fire breaks out, right? I think that'd be a really valuable option. And so I think that that's something that we're going to try for next year, at least the bosses. I'm just a lowly, I'm the hired help. The people whose names hang over the door at the Capitol. I think that's something that they're going to pursue next year, because, we don't think that gun bans work. We think, the closer the fire extinguisher is to where the fire breaks out, the quicker you put the fire out, right? And so that we ought to protect our kids from all sorts of dangers, not just fires, but also guys with firearms, right? So,
yeah. Now we do have a few people that are talking about just driving, into the school to pick their kid up or whatever. If you don't exit your vehicle, then you're not in violation of a law right now. If you do have to exit the vehicle on school property, before you exit, you have to lock that firearm in a lockable compartment, a safe of some sort that's tethered to the vehicle, or a glove box that locks with a key or something like that, and then lock the doors of the vehicle as well before you can go in, right?
yeah, I think that's right. And that's pretty much, again, nothing changes on that from where we are today. And there is, though, express authority for you to be on, in the parking lot that's publicly accessible, but then you do have to secure the firearm before you enter the premises. And don't that rule.
Don't step out of the car and walk around to the trunk and then unholster your gun and put it in the trunk, because that would be a violation. You have to do it before you exit the vehicle, right?
Yeah.
And then to reholster, which is not safe, drive off before you get somewhere else and safely reholster.
Yeah. So teach your kid how to find your car and come out there without you having to get out.
Right. And teach your kid that you shouldn't have to go in and talk to the principal about stuff with them.
Yeah, that's it. Stop getting in trouble.
Okay, so let's see here. Somebody who's open carrying while driving down the street past a school. Yeah, don't worry about that. Just keep traveling. You'll be okay there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I know I've probably missed a couple questions, but again, those of you that are submitting questions that are just joining us, we've covered a lot of this already. So you will be able to go back and restart this from the beginning, and you can get those answers there. And now I've got one, and there's a few people asking about alcohol. And I mean, we all know that there's a zero tolerance for alcohol in your, blood, urine, wherever, as far as, or on your breath, when you're carrying with your CHP, that'll remain the same, of course, without it. Now, I did have somebody ask me last night, and I said I would bring this question up to you, whether it's having alcohol in your system, or you take your firearm into a prohibited place, especially if it's one that is on the prohibited places list, like a bank or courthouse or something like that. Now the offense for that is not a felony charge. It is a
Correct.
misdemeanor charge, correct?
Well, let's back up. So for most of these places, you're correct. It's a misdemeanor charge. If you carry a gun into a school, it's a felony.
Okay.
And that's not under the Concealed Handgun Permit Act. There's a separate law in Chapter 28 of the Nebraska Revised Statutes that's specifically about firearms at schools, and that refers to open or concealed carry. Yeah. So,
All right. Very good. So the places where it's a misdemeanor charge, you said earlier that is still a firearms charge. So is that going to mean that anybody who gets hit with one of those loses their firearm rights?
no. So some of the things that it could mean will no longer have as great an effect, which is a good thing. But I'll give you an example. So right now, if you were, convicted of what we'd call currently a permit holder violation relating to one of those prohibited locations, you're going to be charged with a misdemeanor. I think it's a Class 3 misdemeanor on a first offense. But the problem is, even though they don't revoke your permit immediately, when you go to renew, now you have a offense relating to weapons crime, weapons laws. And so you're disqualified from renewing your permit. And there's the potential under existing local ordinances that you can outright lose your entire ability to have guns at all in town in that city. And Lincoln is an example where they pile on with these additional prohibitors for misdemeanors, not just the usual list that you say no to when you're buying something at the gun store. And so, so the answer is we're doing away with some of the collateral consequences. But I'll tell you, like if you move to another state, like I'm working on a case right now for a guy who lives in Maryland, and he had a concealed carry charge here in Nebraska. It was a first offense, so it was a misdemeanor. And if he doesn't get that set aside in Nebraska, it's a lifetime disability in the state of Maryland under the state of Maryland's laws.
Wow. So
if you ever move to some other place where the laws take a dimmer view of our pastime and our right that we're talking about here than Nebraska does, that's where the consequences are really going to be more serious. But no, you do not become a prohibited person under state or federal law from committing one of these. But I just, think about you're applying for the next job and they do a background check and now they see a conviction that's just anything related to guns. There's just a certain segment of the population that's going to scare them right there without even knowing anymore. Right. So that's all the reason to focus on that.
All right, the comments and questions have really slowed down out in the live chat, so I'm going to open this up to the rest of the board here that are on the panel. Any questions that you have or people have asked you that we haven't covered yet tonight? We'll give you guys a chance. So Aaron, I know you had said you had something you wanted to ask. I'll let you start off.
Well, my question was that if there's signs that you can't go in there because of firearms, there are some signs, like my job, for instance, that also has firearms and knives on there. How would that be applied through the law?
Yeah, so I mentioned this briefly earlier. So if it's a concealed handgun, you're going to be charged with the gun crime we were talking about, which currently we'd call a permit holder violation, but they'll call it something else. And we'll see what the judges start captioning those cases as. But the bottom line for everything else, it's just like if you go into the gas station that says no shirt, no shoes, no service, and you don't have a shirt or shoes on, right? You're a trespasser. And so that's not a gun crime, but it's still a misdemeanor crime in the state of Nebraska to be present on a property where, you've entered it unlawfully, or you're not leaving after reasonable notice from the property owner and you don't have any right to be there. Right. So, you can still be charged with a crime. It's just not going to be a gun crime. Now, if you're causing a big scene and you scare some people, you're liable to get disturbing the peace charges. And if you're waving something around, you're going to get a terroristic threats felony charge, I would say. So, it's just one of those things where, what does it say in the Bible? The disciples land one place and the people don't want to listen to them and just kind of make fun of them. And the disciples just kind of knock the dust off their shoes and keep moving. Right. And it says, that's what I would say, man. Vote with your dollars and take those dollars someplace else to somebody who appreciates you and doesn't want to discriminate against you on the basis of you exercising your civil rights.
I thought it's more of a weapons charge for a knife if it had on the sign.
No,
And
no.
and another thing, that there are some states that have constitutional carry, but it's only applied towards the citizens of that state.
Yeah, and North Dakota is one of those currently, although I think they're fixing that right now. But again, I think that's actually constitutionally suspect to discriminate between residents of different states on like a core civil right, which is what we're talking about here. So I'm glad that Nebraska didn't have to take that step to have a passable bill. And early on in the cycle, states that did this early, like Wyoming, did that, I think, because you're eating the elephant one bite at a time, and that's a smaller, more manageable bite because it seems less extreme. And we know our neighbors, we trust our neighbors more. But look, we're talking about other Americans who are coming into the state and want to enjoy freedom just like we want to enjoy it as people who live here, right? So what's the problem with that? And when you're a traveler, you're at a little heightened risk, right? You're in an unfamiliar place, and people might try to take advantage of you. No reason to not be armed. So.
Yeah, we've got a few questions out there just asking about reciprocity and things like that. And just the short answer there are many resources. If you do a quick Google search for concealed carry reciprocity from state to state, you'll find maps that show you which states don't require permits for residents, non-residents. You'll find maps that'll show you which states recognize the permit that you have. So we're not going to get into each one of those tonight. We just don't have the time to cover that all, but that info is out there, and NFOA will be working to compile some of that as well. The thing is that landscape's, it's always changing. And so that's a lot of it.
Yeah. And just the states around us understand keeping your permit. 5 of our neighbors already have constitutional carry, so you're good to go. But Colorado does offer reciprocity, although they've got magazine restrictions and things now, I guess, but they do have reciprocity that they offer to Nebraska permit holders. So there's a benefit. If you ever go over to Wisconsin, they honor the Nebraska permit, although they're not constitutional carry. The remaining southern states that are not constitutional carry, like Louisiana, they honor our permit. So there are a number of places that you can go, North Carolina, Virginia, that having that concealed handgun permit is still going to benefit you. And, oh, hey, I got to take a surprise business trip someplace. Well, if you get the permit, you've already got the right to carry there, most likely, unless it's a truly godforsaken place like New York or California, or
Right.
And we're working on those, right? The Supreme Court's got to knock those down.
That would be great if that would happen.
Or
Joe,
Minnesota.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah, sorry.
Joe, do you want to
In June, and
Can I jump in on this?
yeah, Nate, go ahead.
I did about 4 or 5 years ago. I traveled to Illinois and I did a lot of research on what their status is, and they do not have a reciprocity with us. They want to honor our permit. However, they do publish on their website and on their state website and in the literature that if you travel in Illinois, traveling through, you do not necessarily have to have the weapon stored for safe, the considered safe travel as long as you are in the car. And if you get pulled over, they look at that if you have that permit, and they're going to grant you some leniency. Do not step out of the car unless you have that broken down with the unloaded and in a non-firing condition, and preferably locked up separately and all of that. But that is one thing I did learn. So even in states that don't have reciprocity, can be some advantage to having that permit.
Yeah. Just check that you don't have an illegal magazine.
Yep.
Take something into that state that it's perfectly legal on one side of the border, but on the other side of the border, it'll get you put in jail. So be careful of that too.
Or a hearing safety device on the end of your firearm.
Right. Exactly. Okay, Joe, do you have any questions or comments that haven't been covered yet that you wanted to make sure we covered tonight?
I seen one comment is Lincoln safe storage law preempted now? That was one of the comments I did see.
Love that you asked. And it's my friend Corey Raymond, famous, now federal public defender, but really swell guy. And Corey, I'm going to out you. Corey has a silencer with his old law firm logo stenciled on it in Cerakote. So how cool is that? So anyway, but the answer is yes, this is preempted. That is exactly what I was thinking of when I wrote the preemption language and included the word storage. And Corey, I will tell you that a certain prosecutor in the city attorney's office, whom I'm sure you know, whose husband is a judge, prosecuted a U.S. Law Shield member that I represented starting last year on this ordinance. And I kind of told her then, hey, don't plan on prosecuting too many more of these because the legislature is going to take this from you. And she actually came in and was very upset in Senator Brewer's office. I mean, not impolite, but pleading for LB77 not to pass because it took things like that away from her. But yes, I'm happy to report that come September, when this law becomes effective, no one will be allowed to be charged under that firearm in an unattended motor vehicle ordinance. So,
All right.
My other question I had for you, and you did answer this, is the right to inform, which is, you know, basically as soon as possible.
yeah, duty to inform, not it's the officer's right. It's your duty. Yeah,
duty, right? But is that actually an arrestable offense?
you bet. Now, understand that most misdemeanors where there's not an element of violence, probably you're just going to get cited and released. Arrest refers to any time you are not free to leave, right? You're detained and now you're going to be cited for a crime. In this case, they're probably going to still release you. Now, could they, in theory, book you if they deemed it necessary for somebody's safety? Yes. More likely, what's going to happen is they're going to take the firearm from you. And if you get it back, you're going to have to, you know, go get it back from the police department. They might not give it back to you on the scene that night if they think you're being a little bit of a space cadet and worrying them on the safety side. And again, that's true under the Permit Act today. An officer who's made an official contact has the authority, really without any other legal cause, just because he thinks it's appropriate for the safety of himself or anybody else present. He can secure that firearm. And if he doesn't think he can safely return it during that encounter, he'd give you a receipt and then you could get that later. So
it's
under the question. The reason why I asked that, Dick, is just within the last couple of weeks, there was a situation in the county I lived in. The guy actually was a passenger. And when the officer came up and made contact with him, that's when he stated, after he'd already pulled the driver out, and he stated that it had been, he didn't inform soon enough. And so he was arrested. And that was kind of the question, so there has been a situation already.
I'm guessing that was in Omaha.
No, actually, it was in Burke County, Nebraska.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, up in
a little
district. Yeah. I mean,
yep.
The answer is it's just you got to fall in the habit of doing this because it is the legal standard in Nebraska. And immediately inform means before you say, hey, officer, how you doing? Lovely weather today. Any of that stuff. The first thing you're going to say is, hey, officer, before we get rolling, just so you know, I'm carrying concealed today. And I got to tell you that. And, you know, you can be polite. You can be regretful if you got to interrupt him to kind of do that. But I want it to be, if I'm your lawyer, I want it to be on that body camera, body microphone recording that even if I had to interrupt the cop, I'm telling him this as soon as I'm engaged with him, as soon as I know he's talking to me and I got to talk back to him. That's the first thing that's going to come out of my mouth. And that is great evidence because now that's immediate. But that's the standard, is you have to immediately inform upon any official contact. So just like I say, you get a couple of strikes before you're out in terms of really having serious consequences, but I don't recommend working up the count. So
right. Zach,
I appreciate
Zach wants to know, and this kind of ties in, I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of the situation you just described.
Yeah.
What about when you're the passenger and the officer's not contacting you directly?
Yeah. So
Correct.
It's a great question. What I would say is err on the side of your liberty being safe. And so
that's what happened.
I'm not sure that they would ultimately obtain a conviction under those facts, but I think it's possible they could. And you don't want to find out the hard way. I just recommend that anybody in the car, and maybe if you're the driver and you got 3 buddies in the car, maybe just do a quick census verbally. Don't be turning around fishing in the back or anything, but, you know, no furtive movements, as they say in police reports. but just say, hey, who all's carrying tonight? How many we got in the car? Okay, 3. All right. And then just say, hey, officer, and maybe consolidate it and just say, hey, officer, just so you know, 3 of us are carrying. I'm not sure that wouldn't pass muster. I think it would because you've caused that immediate notice to be given, and that officer is now informed. And then probably he's going to follow up and say, okay, well, where's everybody got their guns? And then the usual joke, well, you don't go for yours, I won't go for mine. And that's usually how the good-natured ones handle that if you get into that conversation. So
That's true.
I got a question here. What if you have a friend or a coworker that you're possibly picking up and they are not allowed to have a firearm?
Yeah. So what's important here, and this is true today, we make it a little better with LB77 in that, if somebody's allowed to have a firearm, but they just don't have a permit, there's not a gotcha game where the gun's under the seat and now somebody that didn't even know it's there could get a concealed handgun charge. So we fixed that problem for adults. But there still is this challenge. If somebody is a prohibited person, and that could be from a felony conviction, it could be if they're currently under indictment for a felony, it could be for a past mental health adjudication, right? Commitment or adjudication of mentally defective. There's a few other things that could throw it, right? Dishonorable discharge from a branch of military service. And if you flew all the way to Moscow and renounced your U.S. citizenship in the American embassy there, that you could do it that way. That's kind of the expensive way to lose your rights. There's cheaper ways to lose your rights. But that person is got a real problem because we live in a country with more guns than people, and it's a felony crime for them to be in possession of a gun. And guess what? If you're sitting in a car in Nebraska and anybody in that car is off-body carrying, guess what? Everyone in the car is considered to be in possession. Everyone in the car is considered to be carrying. And so that is very dangerous for somebody who's a felon. Now, this is not a state law issue. The second part I'm going to mention, but it's even scarier. So under federal law, a spent shell casing down in between the carpet in your car and the molding on the door, whatever, that's considered ammunition. And a felon who sits in the passenger seat of your car is committing a federal felony crime because now he's going to be accused or could be accused of being in possession of ammunition. So the solution is on-body carry.
So I guess if that happens, just lock it up in your vehicle.
Yeah. Or, again, that's partly on if a person is a felon or otherwise prohibited, the burden falls on them too, to know what they can and can't do. And a prudent person would ask before they get in the car. So.
But
like Dick said, firearm either on your body or in a secure compartment that's not easily accessible by them, or they don't have the key or the combination or whatever it is.
All right. All right. Well, Dick gets a chance to compose himself. Nate, we'll move over to you. Did you have any comments or questions that we needed to cover?
Well, there was one question that we got skipped by. Somebody had asked, where can we get the final cut draft of the LB77 as it was passed?
Yeah, so if you go to nebraskalegislature.gov is the website, and you click on the little drop-down menu, you can select bills and laws. Click on that, and you just punch in 77 into the box there and click through. And that'll take you to LB77's bill page, and you'll see the whole history of the bill and all the different filibuster amendments and motions and things that were thrown on it. You'll see the journal entries, but at the very top in the middle of the page, pretty much right under the header, you'll see these links for like introduced copy, and then you'll see final reading copy, and then slip law copy. And the slip law copy is the version of the law as it's going to go in the law books. So that is the most final version of that, and that's all accessible from the bill page linked right here.
All right, so those of you watching on Facebook or YouTube can look in the comments, and we did just post the link to the LB77 landing page. And then if you go there, right there at the top of the page in the center where it says text copies, there's where you can find the introduced copy, the final reading, and the slip law copies. All right. Anything else, Dave?
I'd like to make one other comment too, John. The big thing that we all need to do is really continue to exercise some good common sense, be prudent of what we're doing. I travel through North Omaha almost daily. I have a shop that I have to get to. And there's been a couple of times that I was almost in the position that I was going to have to draw my weapon. I mean, I was sitting there going through my head, am I going to do this or can I get by without? The one thing, and we saw it in the old market, you pull a weapon at the wrong time, in the wrong surroundings, and you can be in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
And again, let's all keep our heads and make sure we're acting appropriately.
Yeah. What I did see one other question pop up, and I just wanted to answer. Somebody asked, does handing your permit on top of your driver's license count as immediately informing? And the answer is no, I don't think so, because really all you're informing them of is that you're a permit holder, not that you're carrying concealed. Now, should you go ahead and make that your practice and just provide that? Yeah, it's great. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you hand them the driver's license, once they go and run that on their mobile data terminal, they're going to be able to see that you're a permit holder. Okay. So the important thing to protect your rights at that moment is not showing them the permit. It's the immediately informing them of the fact that you are carrying concealed that day. Now, if they go back to your car or to their car and they run your license and they see you have a permit and you haven't told them you're carrying, we all know right now that's kind of this weird catch-22 where you're not required to tell them that you're a permit holder. But if they find out you're a permit holder and you didn't tell them you're carrying, they're going to probably ask you. And so in one way, that's how LB77 is going to make the world a little better, because frankly, it's not going to be some credential that potentially causes suspicion on the part of an officer towards a person. If you're not a permit holder, it's just that duty to inform is the first that they're going to have a chance to hear of it, unless you're in a situation where you're getting arrested and there's a search and they find the gun, and then you're going to be in some trouble if you haven't informed. So,
yeah. And again, for those of you out there watching, listening, make sure you help spread the word that we do have a state law here. Duty to inform is the law. It is required, no exceptions. And also, if you have the list of prohibited places that don't need to be posted, help spread that word too, so we don't get people jammed up inadvertently for carrying places they shouldn't, because again, the fact that you don't know any better is not going to help you before a judge.
Yeah, and let's really set the example of how we all believe that personal responsibility and liberty go together, right? And the fact is, we have a constitutional right to do something. Now let's use it in a manner where people say, oh, big sigh of relief. Look, these people are, sensible after all, and they are responsible, and they understand what it means to carry a firearm, and how that is a weighty responsibility. And they take these steps to be worthy of that responsibility, not legally in that legal sense, but in the sense of being responsible. And one thing that I really hope is that what we see is a lot of instructors who don't just get out of the instructor business, but I hope what we see now is more opportunities for these specialized classes where the teacher gets to teach their strengths as an instructor, right? And the things that they really are good at delivering in terms of classroom time and range instruction, the practical stuff. And let's prove people wrong and show these trainers that we're going to keep giving them business. And now we're going to do it not because the law says we have to teach them to the test or whatever, but because we want to be that good guy. So.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. That's the one I wanted to say.
And by the way, I would just mention that there's not a legal requirement in the sense of you could be charged with a crime for not taking the class or crime for not doing these other things to get a permit. But now I want to, if I'm your lawyer, I want to be able to talk about how you went above and beyond, right? And how, hey, the bare minimum is here, but my client, John went and pursued these other things because he wanted to make sure that firearm is going to be used in the manner it's supposed to be used in, and that he's not going to make a mistake from lack of training and understanding. And so he's gotten the legal part of it, where he understands that and really isn't going to make a legal mistake. And he's got the practical training down. And so that's why I'm telling you he's a good guy, because look at all the things he's done to avoid the possibility of making a mistake. He's tried to train out those mistakes. And so I like that, being able to talk about that. Now, maybe talk to your instructor if they're giving you all kinds of, shirts that, have the, smile, wait for flash type, Punisher stuff, maybe that's not the motif you want to be going for, right? We'll go for responsibility, not vengeance, as the reason that we're going to classes. But yeah, it's a good thing to get training, I think.
Right, exactly. Also, let's make it very clear too that duty to inform applies not only to law enforcement but also to emergency personnel. So
Yeah, that's right.
if you're in a car accident and the ambulance rolls up before law enforcement does, you still have that duty to inform the paramedics as well, so that they know if you're carrying, because they may choose to disarm you as well.
Yeah, they do have the authority to do that. I will tell you that paramedics and EMTs and firefighters they're not always in that mode where, hey, I might have to arrest this next person that I deal with. So they may not reach for that hammer because it's not the one that's on their tool belt, but still there's a legal requirement there. Let's be uniform in our performance of that duty that the law currently gives us. And somebody asked a related question here that I do want to hit. Jeff Pitts mentioned it. And the question is, hey, does having a permit and not saying anything give an officer reasonable suspicion that you're committing a crime? And I don't think that the answer is yes. I think the answer to that is no, Jeff, because again, being a permit holder doesn't mean you're probably carrying a gun. I mean, I hope you're carrying a gun. If you're law abiding and you're in your right mind and in a condition to do it, I want you to be prepared. But having a permit just means the state has authorized you to carry. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing it at that moment. Now, some of the cops that are kind of more on our side of things will fuss at you if you're not carrying. You say, "Oh, I'm a permit holder, I'm not carrying." Well, why not? And I like those kind of encounters. You might get ribbed a little bit by them, but that's better than the other direction it could go. But yeah, I don't think that's reasonable suspicion, because the answer is I only have a duty to inform related to when I am carrying concealed. It is not my permit holder status or anything else that trips that switch. It's just the question is, do I have a concealed handgun, within the meaning of the law? And if I do, this is how I have to respond to that contact. So,
all right. Yukon has a great question too. Will Omaha be forced to destroy their handgun registry?
It's a great question, and the answer is I'm not sure that they do have to destroy it. The thing I can tell you for sure is they can't have an ordinance that's enforceable anymore. So that means they cannot compel you to participate in the registry. I don't think that the way we wrote LB77 forces them to delete the information they already have. And that's, now there are other laws out there that have to do with protecting the confidentiality of permit holder information and gun owner information. So there might be a way to prevent them from releasing it publicly, but this law doesn't force them to delete it.
But once it takes effect in September, they will no longer be able to require.
Correct. You have no duty to register a handgun or to update the registration of your handgun after that effective date for LB77.
They just sell that handgun and get something else.
That's right.
Yes,
I'm going to jump in. I almost expect Omaha to maintain the list and still encourage registration of handguns, just because they think it's an aid in helping know what's out there, and if we have something stolen, they know where it came from, type of thing. So I expect them to want to keep that list and encourage registration. They just won't be able to require it.
Yeah. So what we're forbidding them from doing, and this is just straight out of the bill, it says that notwithstanding other provisions, et cetera, counties, cities, and villages shall not have the power to regulate the ownership, possession, storage, transportation, sale, or transfer of firearms or other weapons, except as expressly provided by state law, or require registration of firearms or other weapons. So they can't require it. I'm not sure that we prevent them from having a voluntary program like you are speculating, Nate. But I guess if people want to volunteer to the government, hey, here's the list of all my guns, I think that's a real bad idea, but I don't suppose that's violating your rights if you're the one that chose to do it. So we'll live to fight another day on that one. But
I think if they were going to get rid of the registration of all those firearms that are already registered, they'll be forced to get rid of the ones that are possibly under investigation.
I don't know.
Well,
But in any case, that'll have to be a conversation about a future bill because, like I say, I don't think that this bill, just hits the delete button on the registry. It just doesn't allow them to require you to register anymore. So
that makes sense. Real quick, too, one question I just thought of, Dick. I know as a permit holder, there are statutes. If my firearm is lost or stolen, I've got limited time to report that. If I cause damage with a handgun, I've got limited time to report that. Does that hold true for non-permit holders under LB77?
no, I don't think that we applied that, but let me just double check. No, it does not apply. Generally, it only applies to permit holders.
Okay. All right. That's also good to know. As an instructor, I'm looking forward very much, as you said, to tailoring some classes that'll be a lot shorter. They won't require a full day of putting your butt in a chair in a classroom to get the pertinent information, and people can take the sections that they want to take and skip the parts they don't. So, all right. We're going to wrap this up here because we want to give everybody their evening back. The questions are slowly coming in. Some of these don't really apply to what we're talking about.
Let me hit the shotgun in a vehicle. Still
Yes.
against the law. It's a separate section of statute. It really has to do more with game laws and road hunting than it does with concealed carry, I think. Now, here's what I tell you. If you really want to have a scatter gun loaded in your vehicle, there is a way to do that legally in Nebraska. And the answer is you've got to go buy an NFA regulated AOW, which is considered a smoothbore handgun. It is not defined as a shotgun under the law of the state of Nebraska. And so therefore that prohibition wouldn't apply. So if you want to pay the $5 transfer tax for an AOW, you can go get a little Serbu shorty or a little, some kind of, short, what we would otherwise call a shotgun, but one that's only ever had a pistol grip on it, never had a shoulder stock, and now it's registered as an AOW. That would be a lawful way to carry a scatter gun. So.
Right. Otherwise, yes, no loaded shotguns in a vehicle, at least not on a public right of way, and no loaded firearms at all on a snowmobile.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So, and Tim wants to clarify, keep up the permit. You are submitting to additional requirements. Yes, the CHP does have requirements that won't be required for non-CHP holders.
Yeah. And really though, that additional requirement about the property damage or injury report, it pertains to your continuing qualification to hold the permit more than any serious criminal penalty, but it is a legal duty that still exists under the law for permit holders.
All right, awesome. Anybody have any comments or questions that you wanted to get in before we wrap this up here on the panel? And again, I do want to reiterate for those folks that joined us late, the reason why we're a little ambiguous on the effective date and we keep saying just the date this takes effect is because we expect the session to end on a certain day, but we don't know for sure that it will end on that particular day, correct, Dick? So it'll be 90 days after the session ends. If it ends when it's supposed to on June 9th, it should take effect September 10th. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. And we can follow up once the legislature actually adjourns, and then NFOA and others can kind of get that notice out and a reminder, hey, here's the countdown. So
Yep. Yeah. Please stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please do. If you haven't liked us on Facebook, please follow us there and the Twitter page as well, Instagram, all those social media places. We will post up as soon as we know. And then we will also be able to put an email blast out. So those of you that are not getting NFOA emails, please drop us a message. Right now, it's kind of an opt-in thing. I'm going to type this in as I say this, but email us at info@nebraskafirearms.org. I can't talk while I'm typing. Put that in the comments there, so you can have that email address. Also, you can just find us. Our website is just nebraskafirearms.org, so you can find that as well, and I'll paste that up on Facebook and YouTube in the comments, so you can go to the website. But if you're not getting the emails and you want them, please let us know. Just drop us a quick email with your name and just asking to be added to the email list, and we'll get you on there. We don't bombard people with a ton of emails asking, if you'll just send us another $10, we'll make sure you don't lose your guns. But we do let people know what's going on when there's something that you need to know or we need you to help with. We send those email blasts out. So do that. Dick, I want to thank you very much for not only the time you've given us tonight, but all the time you've given NFOA over the years, all the time that you have spent drafting bill after bill after bill to get constitutional carry brought to Nebraska. Congratulations to not only you, but Senator Brewer, all of the co-sponsor senators and their staffs, everybody who had a hand in this. I like to say that, I know I took a small part in this being on the NFOA board, but, I'm just one tiny cog in a great big machine, and all of the current board, we stand on the shoulders of those that went before us, that paved the way with the CHP Act to begin with back in 2006, all the way through to now 2023, when we've got constitutional carry. This wouldn't have happened without the combined efforts of all of those folks and all of you across Nebraska who made your voices heard, stood up and were counted and said, hey, we want this done. So please continue to send good people into the legislature and continue to let them know what you expect of them. Stay vocal. The squeaky wheels tend to get greased. So if we want to build on this momentum, folks, let's keep it up. Let's get some of these other bills if we want to have somebody submit a bill addressing duty to inform, then let's find somebody to do that. That's your prerogative as a voter. If we want to address being able to have school staff arm themselves, then let's address that. Let's get the word out. Let's get people talking about it. So when the time comes, we can have a concerted effort. But again, please help us spread the word that we are here, that there is an NFOA. Please tell all your friends and relatives that live in Nebraska that there is such a thing, that we would love to have you be members. When it comes time to testify on these bills and show up in the gallery and just have a presence in the Capitol or contact senators' offices, the more help we get, the easier these bills get passed. Why did it take this long? Because we don't always get all the support that we want from the rest of the state. Why is it taking so long to get some of the things done, like the training modules? I'll address that one real quick, just so everybody knows we're all volunteers. Nobody gets paid to do this at NFOA. We do it because we believe in it, which is, I think, the better policy. None of us are here just to collect a paycheck. Our hearts and our souls are into this effort, but we all have jobs. Some of us have multiple jobs, and time is our most precious commodity. So we get things done as we can get them done, but we're always looking for help. So if you're good at computer stuff, if you're good at graphic design, if you're good at, whatever it is, contact us. We want to bring you in and harness your strengths to make our organization greater. Please let us know that. So thank you, Dick, for giving us your expertise on this bill and everything else that you've done tonight. Aaron, Joe, Nate, I appreciate you joining us here and being on the live stream here with us. Again, if you didn't get your question answered because we just didn't see it, please feel free to email us. You can also email info@nebraskafirearms.org. You can direct message us on Facebook. A lot of you do that, and we get to those as soon as we can. We'll get all the questions answered that we can to the best of our ability. But once we get some of this info, yes, we'll post it up as soon as we know it. So tentative date, September 10th. It's not in stone until the session ends, but it will be sometime in September that these take effect. So in the meantime, the law hasn't changed yet. Don't forget that, but make sure that you know the law before you start to carry without that permit. So with that, we're going to give everybody back your night. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Again, help us grow our numbers. The more numbers we have and the more involved you get, the easier these things are to accomplish. And we can't do this without you. So thank you all. You guys have a great rest of your night.